Cole Marlowe was already on the floor by the time I came down off the truss, and I knew what was wrong before anyone standing over him did. 20 feet up, tightening a turnbuckle on the back rigging, I'd watched him stumble out of the cutting room looking the wrong shade of gray, and a gray like that, on a fighter 2 hours for making weight, only ever means one thing. I've been building cages and hanging lights for traveling fight cards for 6 years. Ever since Marion died, and I needed work that let me be parked outside Hazel School by 3:10 sharp. Every day, no exceptions. Rigging paid fine and asked nothing of me but my hands and my attention, and nobody backstage at a Crossfire card ever looked twice at the crew up in the dark above the cage. That was the whole appeal of the job. I liked being the man nobody needed to think about. Tonight mattered more than most nights did. Tessa Marlowe had taken Crossfire Fight Series over from her father 3 months back, and every sponsor and promoter in 3 states was watching to see if a 31-year-old woman could keep the company standing on her own. Her younger brother Cole was the whole card. The prospect everyone had bought tickets to see, the only name with enough pull to carry Crossfire through one more season if the cable deal came through. I'd heard the corridor talk about it all week, the way you hear weather. None of it had anything to do with me. I wasn't there to be talked about. He hit the concrete hard enough that I felt it land through the truss cable in my hand. Hollis County Arena ran narrow backstage. Cinder block, bad fluorescent light, a hallway built for storage carts, not stretchers. And by the time I dropped the last 6 feet and crossed to him, 3 people were already standing over Cole, doing absolutely nothing useful. A cut man wringing a towel he had no use for. A PR girl with her phone half raised like she meant to film it. And the night's operations chief, a clipped, sharp-faced man named Marcus Doyle, shouting into a radio that wasn't answering because the card's contracted physician was 200 feet away through solid block, stitching a cut over the co-main fighter's eye, and had no idea any of this was happening. Cole's heart was doing something it had no business doing, and not one person near him knew it yet. I'd seen that exact color on a man's face before, more times than I ever wanted to count, and never once expected to see it again backstage at a regional fight card in Central Texas. I went down on one knee beside him and found the pulse at his throat. Too fast, too thin, the kind of rhythm a body throws when it's been stripped of water and salt, cutting 8 pounds in 18 hours, and the wiring underneath finally short circuits. I turned him onto his side before he choked on his own spit. I told the cut man to get me water, salt, anything with electrolytes in it now, not in a minute. I told the PR girl to put the phone down and get his legs up on something. Doyle started toward me with his hand out, telling me to step back. This wasn't rigging crew business. I didn't look up at him. He's in V-Tatch, I said flat. No room in it for argument. And if you put a hand on me instead of getting that service door open for paramedics, you're going to stand here and watch him die in front of his sister's whole company. Something in how I said it made Doyle's hand drop and his feet move toward the door instead of toward me. I kept 2 fingers on Cole's pulse and started talking to him low and steady. The way you talk to a man whose mind is the only thing standing between his body and a panic that'll kill him faster than the arrhythmia will. Stay with me, Cole. Eyes on me, not the ceiling. You're going home tonight. You hear me say that? The cut man came back at a dead run with a bottle of the electrolyte mix the cornermen kept for rehydrating fighters after a cut, and I had him pour it slow against Cole's lips, a swallow at a time. Nothing he could choke on. Somewhere behind me, Doyle had finally gotten the service door propped open and a second radio working. His voice gone tight and fast, giving the arena's cross street to dispatch. The PR girl had stopped trying to film anything and was kneeling with Cole's ankles propped on her knees exactly where I'd told her to hold them. Not moving, not asking questions, doing the one useful thing anybody had asked of her all night. It struck me, even with my fingers still counting his pulse, that fear does that to people sometimes. Strips away whatever they thought they were and leaves only whoever they actually are underneath. Cole's eyes found mine, glassy, scared, and he nodded once, which was all I needed from him. I kept his legs elevated, kept the towel under his neck so his airway stayed open, kept my voice in his ear the whole 4 minutes it took the paramedics to fight their way through a corridor never built for a gurney. By the time they reached us, his pulse had leveled enough that the lead medic actually paused over him a half second before she touched anything. looked at how I'd position him, looked at the roll towel under his knees, looked at the slow, counted breathing I'd talked him into, and asked me the question I'd spent 6 years backstage hoping nobody would ever ask. Who's been working him? Where'd you train? I didn't answer that one. I was already coming up off my knee, already stepping back to give her team the floor, and in the moving, my jacket caught on the gurney rail, and the old unit coin I still carried, 3 deployments worth of a life I never talked about, dropped out of the pocket and rang once against the concrete before her partner bent down, picked it up, looked at the engraving, looked at me, and pressed it back into my hand without a word, like he understood exactly what he was holding and exactly why I wasn't going to explain it to him in a hallway. Tessa Marlowe came around that corner 4 seconds after the gurney did, and I have never in my life watched a person's face do what hers did right then. The color going out of it the same way it had gone out of her brother's. Both hands pressed flat over her mouth. 3 months of fighting to keep a company alive, suddenly meaning nothing next to the only family she had left going out a service door, strapped to a board. She didn't look at me. There was no reason she should have. I was a man in a tool belt against a cinder block wall, and I closed my hand around the coin, put it back where it lived, and climbed the ladder back up to the rig because the lighting truss for the co-main still needed its last turnbuckle, and the show, somehow, in under an hour, was still going to go on. I worked the rest of that card from 20 feet up the way I always did, hand steady, mind somewhere else entirely. When it ended, I didn't go straight home. I drove to Calverton General instead and sat in my truck in the parking lot for the better part of an hour, telling myself I just wanted to know he'd made it, that it had nothing to do with anything else. Through the waiting room glass, I could see Tessa Marlowe pacing a strip of linoleum like she'd worn a path in it. Phone pressed to her ear, telling someone. Their mother, maybe, that Cole was stable, that the doctors were saying his heart rhythm would settle on its own with fluids and rest, that some stranger backstage had apparently known exactly what to do before anyone else even understood there was a problem. I watched her say stranger and felt no urge at all to walk in and correct her. I drove home, relieved the neighbor who'd put Hazel to bed, stood over my daughter's bed for a minute the way I do most nights, and told nobody at the arena, or anywhere else, whose name was on the coin in my pocket. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong by exactly 2 days. Cole came out of it fine. A cardiologist note about a weight cut pushed too far, a week off, nothing permanent waiting for him down the road. That much I learned the way everybody backstage eventually learns things, through 3 other people before it reaches the rigging barn. What I didn't expect was Tessa Marlowe standing in the open bay door of the equipment warehouse on a Tuesday afternoon, watching me coil cable, looking like she'd been working up the nerve to walk in for longer than she wanted to admit to me or to herself. She'd pulled the event's staffing roster looking for whoever had been in that hallway, and all it told her was a name and a 6-year hire date through a rigging subcontractor. It had taken her assistant 1 phone call to the VA to get the rest of it, 3 deployments, special operations medic training, a Bronze Star citation Tessa hadn't been clear to read, but had been told existed. Nobody told me, she said, still standing in that doorway like the math of it wouldn't square. 6 years on my payroll, and not one person thought to mention you could do what you did Friday night. Nobody asked, I said, and went back to the cable because I wasn't in the habit of standing around being looked at, and because some part of me, the part that walked away from emergency medicine the week after Marianne's funeral and never once went back, didn't especially want the credit for it. I'd buried a wife I couldn't save in a hospital full of people who'd done everything right and lost her anyway. I wasn't going to turn around and make a performance out of saving somebody else's brother in a hallway. Marcus Doyle showed up about 10 minutes into it, hovering near the bay door, looking like a man who'd come to apologize and hadn't worked out how yet. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. He'd been scared and doing his job under pressure, same as anybody, and watched some of the weight come off his shoulders before he made himself useful hauling cable boxes and left us to it. Tessa let the silence sit a second, then said what she'd actually driven out there to say. She wanted me as Crossfire's full-time medical and safety director. Real title, real salary, my hands, and my judgment on every car from here on, instead of just the rigging up above it. Her father, she said, had built this company cutting corners on exactly the kind of coverage that nearly cost her the only family she had left, and she wasn't running it that way for one more season. Not now that she knew what could be sitting 20 feet over her head the whole time, and nobody thought to ask. I told her I'd take it on one condition, and it wasn't a big one. Not a raise on top of the offer. Not my name on a press release. I told her every fighter on every undercard. Not just the names with sponsors, the 4-fight prelim kids nobody in the stand has heard of yet. Got the same coverage Cole got Friday night, certified and funded every single show, top of the card to the bottom of it. I'd spent 6 years up in that trust watching kids who weren't anybody's brother fight on cards where the medical plan amounted to hoping nothing went wrong. I wasn't interested in being the man who only mattered the night. It was the owner's own family on the floor. She didn't argue with it. Just nodded, slow, like she'd known that condition was coming the moment she decided to drive out here herself instead of sending someone with a contract. Then she asked, almost like an afterthought, why a man with that record had spent 6 years coiling cable instead of working a hospital floor where people clearly needed him. I gave her the only true answer I had. After Marianne, I needed work that let me see my daughter's bus pull up at 3:10 every single afternoon without fail, and trauma medicine doesn't run on that kind of schedule. Rigging a cage 3 weekends a month does. She offered the job with a schedule built around exactly that, no negotiating required, and shook my hand standing in that bay door like she meant it all the way down. I drove home that evening and told Hazel I'd be working a new job starting next month. Still home for dinner every night. Still hers first before anything Crossfire ever needed from me. She didn't ask what the job was. She asked if I'd still be able to come to her thing on Thursday. And when I told her I would, that was the whole conversation, because an 8-year-old has her priorities straighter than the rest of us manage most of our lives. I've thought about that coin 100 times since. How close it came to staying in my pocket forever, the way I'd planned it would. But I've come around to thinking there's no shame in being seen, as long as what finally gets seen is the truth of it. I was never just a rigging man standing against a cinder block wall. I was a father who happened to know how to keep a young man's heart beating long enough for somebody who loved him to get there in time. That was always enough all by itself. It just took one bad night in a hallway in Hollis County for anybody besides me and Hazel to find that out.